Hi everyone, you're going to need your 7th chords handout and also your Intro to 5/7 handout and a pencil. So go ahead and grab those things and we'll get started. Alright, so what do we mean when we say 7th chords? If you take any triad and you stack another third on top of it, you have in essence created a 7th chord. The 4-note harmony gets its name by the interval from the root to the outermost extension, the 7th. Now there are different qualities of 7th chords, just like there are different qualities of triads, and you see them here on your handout. And there are two designations for each 7th chord. If you look at the first one we have there, the major 7th chord, we've got this capital M here, and that refers to the quality of the triad at the bottom. And then we have the second M that is also capitalized, and that is referring to the quality of the 7th, so the outermost pitches. Now sometimes we refer to a 7th chord by its quality, so you'll sometimes hear people refer to a major 7th chord or a major minor 7th chord, but some of those 7th chords have sort of special names. The most common one being the dominant 7th. A dominant 7th chord is actually a major triad with a minor 7th on the outside. We just refer to it as a dominant 7th chord. And then we have the minor 7th chord, and you'll see we have two flavors of 7th chords that have diminished triads. The first one, with our diminished triad, has a minor 7th on the outside. And we refer to that as the half diminished 7th chord. And you'll notice that the symbol for it looks a lot like the diminished symbol, but it's got a little slash through it. And now alternatively, if we have a diminished triad that has a diminished 7th on the outside, that's what we refer to as a diminished 7th chord, or you'll sometimes hear me at least refer to it as a fully diminished 7th chord. And that takes the same symbol as a diminished triad, so just that little kind of degree circle. And then we also have the augmented 7th chord, which is an augmented triad with a major 7th on the outside. Not super common for what we're going to be seeing this semester, but it does exist out in the wild. Okay, let's talk about 7th chords in major and minor keys. If you watched video 7, we actually went and derived the triads for major and minor keys. So we spelled out the major and minor scales, derived the triads, figured out their quality. I did the heavy lifting for you, and there it is in front of you. And you see the sequence of 7th chord qualities in major and minor keys. And I'm going to say the same thing I did in video 5, which is this sequence, this pattern, is the same for any major or minor key. So I don't care if you're in C major or A major or C flat major, your 4/7 is always going to be a major 7 chord. Your 6/7 is always going to be a minor 7 chord. That's just going to hold true for every major and minor key. Now you might notice that we have two chords, two 7th chords built off of scale degree 5 in the minor key, and two that are built off of scale degree 7. Now, just like with triads, we are just invoking two different flavors of minor. So we have natural minor, and that gives us a minor quality 5 chord, minor quality 5/7, and a dominant quality 7/7. And then we have the two chords that we get if we use harmonic minor, specifically if we raise the leading tone. And doing that gives us a dominant quality 5/7 and a fully diminished 7/7. Okay, now when we had triads, we worked through the inversions, also in video 5, and we had a root position, we had a first inversion, and we had a second inversion. Then we ran out of notes. We've got a 4th note now, so we do have an extra inversion with 7th chords. So let's talk about how we're going to label them. So root position, obviously the root is in the bass, and the figured bass, again, just as a refresher, derives from the intervals above the bass. So we've got our root, third above the bass, fifth, and seventh. And that's where we get the 3 and 5 and 7 in the figures. We do abbreviate this though. More often than not, you are just going to see a 7. No 5, no 3. All right, now we take the root, let's pop it up an octave. So now our third is in the bass. And that gives us now intervallically a third, a fifth, and a sixth above the bass, hence the numbers 3, 5, and 6, but most often it will be abbreviated as a 6, 5. Now let's take our third, swing it up, fifth in the bass, figures of 6, 4, 3. Again, this one has an abbreviation of 4, 3. And last but not least, our new inversion, our third inversion with the 7th in the bass, 2 and 4 and 6. So those are our intervals above the bass. Gives us a 6, 4, 2. Most often abbreviated as 4, 2, or I tend to just write it as a 2. Either one is fine. Really quick kind of hack to remembering these. We're just going down numerically, right? Root position is a 7. First inversion 6, 5. Second inversion 4, 3. Third inversion 2. So that's a quick kind of hack to remembering what the labels are for the 3 inversions. Okay, so that is 7th chords in a nutshell. Now we're going to take the rest of the time to focus on arguably the most important 7th chord, which is the 5, 7. So go ahead and get your intro to 5, 7 handout, and we will start with that. Okay, so you've got a score snippet in front of you. This is from the end of the William Tell Overture. I'm assuming most of you know this, either from William Tell or from Looney Tunes, one or the other. I'm going to play this snippet for you, and I want you to just take a look at your score. It goes by really quickly, it's quite fast, but follow your score, and I want you to take stock of the harmonies that we're dealing with. That's what you get. It does go by quickly. I'm going to play that for you again, and I want you to see if you can sing along with the bass line. The trumpet fanfare in the beginning is on scale degree 5, so use that to find 1, and just see if you can sing along with the bass line. I know it goes fast. It does repeat, so I'll let it go through twice and see how you do. Ever heard. But let's go through anyways and put some Roman numeral labels on what we do have. So just taking a quick look at your score, we're in E major, we start on tonic, we move to the dominant for a really quick bar, go back to tonic, and then this dominant here is a little bit more special, and you can actually see the way it's written out in this reduction. It gives you just a big fat fully stacked third 5, 7. And then back to 1. And now let's take a look at the way these phrases break up and kind of what kind of gestures we have going on to try and figure out why Rossini chooses just a 5 the first time and then a 5, 7 the second time. So we get this kind of standing on scale degree 5 in the melody. and this little rise at the very end. And then we go back to scale degree 5. And we get this kind of up and down contour here. And then we go back to scale degree 5. And this gesture seems to last a little bit longer. We move all the way up to the upper scale degree 5 before we kind of tumble down the scale back to tonic. So 2 short gestures, and then 1 longer one that brings us to kind of through the climax of the phrase and to its conclusion. Now, looking at that, we seem to get the regular 5 early on. So we get our first gesture entirely on tonic. Second little gesture moves to the dominant, just a regular 5. The third gesture, we start on tonic, we go through this big climax, and that's where our 5/7 is. And then we kind of cascade down back to tonic to close out the entire phrase. So it seems like the 5/7 is there at a moment of importance, right as we're getting to the end of this 8-bar statement. Why a 5/7 versus a 5? Now, a lot of that has to do with the construction of the 5/7 and what scale degrees are at play. Now, you might have gotten this in oral skills already. If not, new information for you. But the scale degrees of a 5/7. We have 5, 7, and 2, which are just from our triad, right? And then we add another third on top to give us scale degree 4. And that scale degree 4 is really, really important. It's a really important addition to the harmony. Now, if you remember when we were doing part writing with 1 and 5, we talked about how the leading tone, scale degree 7, has a strong tendency to reach upward by half step to 1. And that strong tendency is part of the reason that the 5 chord is so important and really kind of nudges us towards tonic. By adding scale degree 4 on top, we've added a second tendency tone, and I outline that down here. So scale degree 7, and we've talked about this a lot, it will resolve to scale degree 1 most of the time. If it's in an inner voice, it can move elsewhere, and that specific elsewhere is it can resolve to 5. And there is a term for that. When we talk about that, taking an inner voice leading tone and moving it to 5 rather than tonic, we call it frustrating the leading tone. Now 7 is a strong tendency tone, but there is another rule that we're going to learn that sort of lets us know why the 5/7 is especially strong and has an especially strong pull to tonic, and that is because chordal 7ths always, 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 forever and always have to resolve down by step. Because of that now, we have scale degree 7 in our 5/7 that wants to go to scale degree 1. And we have scale degree 4, because it's a chordal 7th, it wants to resolve down by step, and it wants to go to scale degree 3. Now, I'm going to take, so there's our 5/7. I'm going to take our 2 tendency tones, 7 and 4, and I'm just going to play them. What do your ears tell you about that? What we have there, on top of everything else, is a really dissonant interval. So the 7th is dissonant against the bass. But we also have this dissonant tritone in the middle of the harmony between 7 and 4. And it really, that diminished 5th really wants to keep falling in to there. So that adds to the kind of strength of that 5/7, because 7 wants to go to 1, 4 wants to go to 3, and everyone just wants to go there. Our 5/7 is so important in tonal music because it has such a strong pull to bring us to its resolution on 1. Okay, we are going to part right with this 5-7 in a second. So a couple of other things to remember. Don't forget to raise the leading tone in minor, forever in your 5 chords. Now, part writing with the 5-7, we sometimes run into some interesting challenges in terms of doubling and whether or not we can maintain a complete tonic triad. And we'll kind of talk about that in more depth when we get to the second page. But one thing I want you to absolutely remember is do not ever double the chordal 7th. Some of you might be asking, why? A chordal 7th has to resolve down in a very specific way. It has to resolve down by step. If you've got 2 of them in your harmony somewhere, and they both have to do the same thing, you have, in essence, backed yourself into a corner where you are absolutely 100% of the time going to have parallel octaves. If you're going to resolve the 7th properly, and you've got 2 of them, you're going to have parallel octaves. For that reason, you can never double the 7th. Now, in terms of maintaining complete triads, maintaining even complete 7th chords, there is one chord member you can get rid of. If you're thinking about any triad or 7th chord, you need the root, because that tells you who home base is, right? You need the 3rd because that tells you the quality of the triad. If I just give you this, you don't know if it's major or minor. So you need the 3rd because it tells you quality. In terms of a 7th chord, you need the 7th because otherwise it's not a 7th chord, right? So that leaves us with one option. It is okay to omit the 5th of a chord. With all that in mind, let's go ahead and try some part writing. Now what you have in front of you is a fully composed out 1-5-1 in D minor with just a regular old 5. We are going to see what happens now when we turn that 5 into a 5-7, how that can potentially change the rest of the process for that progression. So let's take a look at letter B here. You have a fully spelled out and fully complete tonic triad to start. And then we have a 5-7. I'm going to just sketch out the 4 pitch names for the 5-7 so we can keep track. We've got 5. We need to raise our scale degree 7. And 2 and 4. Now, we already have the root in the bass, and we have the 5th in the soprano. You know from our previous page that if you are going to omit anyone in the 7th chord, it has to be the 5th. So since we already have a 5th, we know that we have to have the 3rd and the 7th in the other 2 voices. Let's keep in mind the part writing that we talked about earlier in the week. Move everybody as little as possible. So let's try and get the smoothest voice leading we possibly can. So we need a C sharp and we need a G in our alto and tenor. And it sorts itself out pretty nicely. Then we end up with a G in the alto, C sharp in the tenor, everyone moved by step. All good. One thing to remember, we do have a P5 here. This 5th motion is okay. You can go from a perfect to a diminished. That is absolutely fine, happens all the time. All right, now let's go ahead and resolve this 5-7. Things to keep in mind, and I am going to be like super annoying about these tendency tones and make you draw arrows, at least for the time being. So your chordal 7th, which is in the alto, has to resolve down. So you're going to draw yourself an arrow as a friendly neighborhood reminder. And for right now, I am going to resolve my leading tones up, even if it's in an inner voice. So that means we are going to get this for our resolution, which if you're looking at that and taking stock of it, we actually have 3 roots and 1/3. Absolutely a-okay. Okay, now let's take a look at this next progression. You'll notice that the starting harmony is voiced slightly differently, and the soprano line is different, and that's going to have some pretty important implications for the final triad. Our 5/7 still needs the same 4 pitches, and we're still given the same 2. So the root and the 5th are already there for us. We need a 3rd, we need a 7th. But let's look at what we have in the inner voices. So we have an F in the alto and an A in the tenor. If we're trying to maintain stepwise motion, it is impossible. So we're going to have to move somebody, maybe multiple somebodies, by leap. This is what I want to highlight, though. There is a particular melodic motion that we need to avoid, and that is moving scale degree 3 to scale degree 7, or vice versa. The reason I mention that is it can be really tempting to see that tenor note and say, oh, cool, I'm going to move that down to G, and then you are stuck with this gross interval and also some spacing issues. So, no 3 to 7 or vice versa. And with that knowledge then, that gives you the answer to your voicing for this second harmony. That means that we actually have to move the alto up to G, and we can move the tenor up by a small leap to the leading tone. We've got more than an octave between the tenor and the bass, and we did in the previous one as well. That's fine. The bass gets to kind of do its own thing, and no one cares how far away it gets. Okay, let's resolve away. I'm going to put my tendency tone arrows in. My chordal 7th is going to go down, and my leading tone is going to go up. Now take a look at that resolution compared to the one we did in letter B. It is voiced differently. Now we actually have 2 roots and 2 thirds, and that's because the soprano line was a little bit different. Probably not our most favorite doubling ever, right? But it is still absolutely okay. Now, if you wanted desperately to have a 5th in any of these triads, yes, it is possible and allowable to frustrate your leading tones down to scale degree 5. I refer to what I call a strict resolution, when all of the tendency tones do exactly what they're supposed to do regardless of what voice they're in. You can never go wrong with that. So you'll never catch yourself in a bind if you strictly resolve everything. You might just find that you don't have 5ths in some of your triads, and you just gotta roll with it. Okay, I want you guys to try one by yourself. What I got here is a short progression that does literally only 1 to 5/7. I give you a bass line, and I gave you most of a soprano line. Let's sketch out a first harmony together, and then I'm going to send you on your way to work this out on your own, and then we'll come back and check. So let's start out this way. We'll put another root in the tenor, and we'll put the 5th in the alto. And I would like you to go forth and see what you come up with for your inner voices and those missing soprano notes. I would like you to find your tendency tones as you work and draw arrows to the resolutions. It's mostly for the purpose of the chordal 7ths. I also want you to know that you might have incomplete triads or 7th chords. One of the challenges with moving from 1 to 5 back and forth is hidden 5ths and octaves. So be really careful about that. Double check your work. So go ahead, put me on pause, work this out, and then come on back and we will see what you've got and we'll talk. Okay, let's see what you've got. and I'm going to troubleshoot a couple spots that can be easy pitfalls. First thing is actually the very first dominant harmony. You'll notice that mine is incomplete. I have two roots, I have a third, and I have a seventh. I do not have a fifth. The reason I don't have a fifth is you get yourself kind of backed into a corner because you would likely want to move the tenor up, right? And if I move the tenor up to this B flat to give me a fifth, then I've got myself some really nice direct fifths against the bass, right? Because my bass and tenor went from an octave to a fifth in the same direction. Likewise, if you wanted to do something in the alto, you would have come up with the same problem because your alto and bass are a fifth apart, and if you wanted to move the alto up here, you would have had then parallel fifths against the bass, and you probably would have gotten yourself into some weird spacing troubles. So, only option is to have an incomplete 5/7. It's cool, roll with it. Your soprano on the next downbeat has to be a C because you had the chordal seventh in the previous beat. Other pitfalls. Let's take a look at actually this harmony. Again, a little unconventional. You've got two roots and a third. The bass had to move up because if I had put my bass down here, I would have had direct octaves against my soprano. So the bass had to move in contrary motion to the soprano, and that means that your only option then is for your other voices to kind of conglomerate on tonic and the third. That's, again, it's not anyone's favorite doubling, but that's what you get. And last but not least, I have two roots and two thirds here. And that is because if I had gone down in the tenor, I would have again had direct octaves. I could have been a lot nicer and like move the bass up, but that's what we ended up with. So that was your first pass at it. See how you did. Make sure that you understand kind of the things that I talked through in the green annotations. And we will approach a lot more of this in class and in successive homework assignments. The big takeaway, chordal sevenths have to resolve down by steps. So when you're part writing with a 5/7, your seventh, your scale degree 4, has to move down to scale degree 3. And most of the time your leading tone should move up to tonic. Okay, that's all I got, guys. Good luck, have fun, and I'll see you in class on Wednesday.